welcome back to my channel. My name is Kayla and I like to talk about books, reading vlogs, all sorts of stuff, but mostly just a lot of like book reviews. Maybe that interests you, maybe it doesn't, but if it does, then definitely subscribe. But today we're going to be talking about the book Firestarter by Stephen King. So if you're interested in that, then keep watching. Firestarter is honestly iconic. I don't know how I hadn't read it yet, but I hadn't read it yet, and I'm so happy that I did, and I'm just really excited to talk about it. Hold on, let me turn that off. Okay, so as usual, I'm going to start with a summary and then I will get into like a review of my thoughts. There will be timestamps below, so if you want to skip right to my review, then definitely feel free to go ahead and do that. Anyway, a lot happens in this book, so my summary is probably not going to be that detailed. I just kind of want to like go over the story basically, but I will be discussing some spoilers in this video. I think it might be unavoidable. I mean, it's avoidable, but I kind of really do want to talk about the ending because it's so good. So anyway, Firestarter by Stephen King follows Andy McGee and his wife Vicky, who met in college and fell in love while they were undergoing this like experiment, this drug experiment, which I don't know if you've ever been a student before. This is definitely a thing that a lot of people for extra money like do kind of drug trial stuff and studies and things like that. So they entered into this kind of sketchy, I don't want to say sketchy, but this like mysterious drug trial thing, and they did it obviously to get a little bit extra money, and they had a very weird experience. They thought it was just like almost like a hallucinogen or something, but they just had a very weird experience during the drug trial, and then afterwards they fell in love, got married, and had a daughter who started exhibiting some interesting behaviors, to put it lightly. So after the trial, definitely a lot of the participants like went crazy. A lot of them actually started developing like some low grade kind of psychic, kinetic, I don't know, telepathic, telekinetic abilities. One of the abilities that Andy developed, which was actually pretty cool, is the ability to like push people into basically doing certain things. And he couldn't just like do it endlessly. He could just do it a little bit to kind of convince people to do things. And luckily he's like not evil, so he never really used this to do anything bad. He actually used it to do like a lot of good things with his little businesses and everything. His wife had like really mild capabilities where she could maybe like close the fridge door from across the room like occasionally. So they didn't have like anything crazy. Obviously Andy's capabilities were pretty cool and probably could have been honed, but they left him really weak after he used them. So anyway, they got together, they had a daughter. This daughter started exhibiting ability called pyrokinesis. As the name suggests, this means that she could like spontaneously light fires with her mind, which is terrifying if you think about an infant being born with that ability. Obviously, they can't really control it or anything like that. So yeah, pretty crazy. The people who like put on this study is actually like this big secret like government organization called The Shop, and they of course followed a lot of the people involved in the study afterwards. Andy had some idea of this, so for like many years they were kind of like mildly on the run slash like just aware that people were watching them. But one day the opportunity arose for these like agents, the people from the shop, to basically snatch his daughter, and they did that. And in the process they murdered his wife, went and snatched his daughter Charlie, and Andy ended up being able to get his daughter back by like using his pushing abilities, and they were like on the run ever since that day. So it follows a lot of time where they're on the run through New York City, and then eventually they hole up at like Andy's grandfather's cabin that he like inherited in Vermont, I think. I don't remember if it was New Hampshire or Vermont. I think it was like on the border, and that was one of the things. But anyway, they hole up there for like an entire winter, and so they're there for, I don't know, like 5 months or something like that. They're there for a while. Obviously these people knew where he was, and I think somewhere deep down he knew that too. too, but like they just needed to basically stop running. But the reason that nobody like pursued them any further when they got to this cabin was because of what happened before they got to the cabin, which was that these really nice people took them in, like, because they were hitchhiking, and gave them lunch. They were called the Manders. I forget what their names were, but anyway, they had this nice farm and they took them in and gave them lunch, and basically Andy ended up coming clean about the truth to these people, and the shop agents who were pursuing them showed up at this farm, and that's when Charlie like really let things out, and basically like killed a bunch of shop agents, lit them on fire, exploded a bunch of cars, the Manders farm burned down. There was all of this just like crazy chaos, and while more shop agents and more sirens and people were coming, Andy and Charlie escaped again using this guy, this Manders's old like car, old Jeep thing, and they managed to escape, like I said, to Andy's grandfather's cabin, where they holed up for a while, but eventually the shop people got together a plan to be able to capture her in a way that they thought was safe, and so they capture Charlie and Andy again. And this is when things really kind of like, it's a lot of action and then it kind of plateaus for a while, and then it becomes obviously like a huge burst of action again. So it kind of plateaus for a little bit while they're captive initially, because both of them are not using their abilities and just like kind of chilling in these weird like apartment places where all these people are observing them. They test them pretty regularly, but nothing comes of it. And then this one guy, John Rainbird, like makes this plan to befriend Charlie and to seem like he's also an outsider and he's not really like one of them. And it kind of works because she's like 7 years old or whatever, you know, she's just a little kid. And so he like kind of befriends her and obviously gets her to start using her abilities again. So she just starts really like honing her skills. They've become a lot more powerful, she realizes. And Andy also actually can still use his capabilities, but he doesn't realize he can. He thinks it's lost him, and then it kind of comes back to him, and he's able to get together basically a plan. He pushes like a few people in these really key moments and gets together a plan to like escape with Charlie. This John Rainbird guy, part of the reason he really wants to get close to Charlie is because he like wants to kill her. He's basically like a hitman, and he's watched so many people die and watched like the life leave their eyes, but he really wants to see specifically what happens with this little girl. I don't know, it's very strange. Anyway, so he like finds out about their plan, basically discovers it, and tries to like crash the party. And they're in these stables where Charlie likes to like ride the horses and see the horses. I don't even know if I want to like give this away, but this is like obviously big spoilers. Like we're at the end right now, so I'm gonna say just like really big spoilers. So Rainbird and Charlie and her dad are all having kind of like this weird like face off where Rainbird's like, Charlie, come to me, and she knows he like wants to kill her. And then Charlie's dad is like, no, come to me. And he ends up using basically his last ability like to super push Rainbird to like jump off the rafters of this stable barn thing that they're in, but he still manages to shoot Charlie's dad, Andy, and Charlie just lets loose and absolutely incinerates him. It is friggin' sweet. It's such a moment. I mean, it's like, you're a little conflicted rooting for it, but you're also kind of like, you kind of brought this on yourselves by like friggin' testing unsuspecting people with like sketchy drugs, and then like trying to snatch like 7-year-old, like, you guys, you're not doing great things right now, okay? Yeah, you're cheering her on a little bit. But anyway, so that all happens. She actually basically manages to escape and goes back in the end. She goes back and finds the Manders, Norma and Irv. That's right. Okay, sorry. I just had to look it up because it was bothering me that I couldn't remember either of their names. That's right. Norma Manders and Irv Manders. Irv is like the farmer guy and Norma's his wife, and they're super sweet. So anyway, like I said, she goes back to the Manderses, and they were always really keen to help her. Like Irv was always really sweet, and he always thought that obviously he didn't like the sketchiness of the whole situation. Her dad's ultimate plan was to like get to the press and release their story to the press. And so that's kind of where the story ends, is with Charlie trying to release the plan to the press because her dad died and all of the stuff that happened at the shop like headquarters. So it was a really, really bittersweet kind of ending. I don't even know how to explain it, but I'm just gonna get right into my thoughts on the story now because I really just finished it too, and I have like a lot of thoughts to share. My first thought being that, wow, this was an instance in which Stephen King really was still so sharp with writing his child characters. I mean, I think he still is, considering like how far away he is from that mindset, but like a lot of the times where it's kind of like in Charlie's brain, it makes sense to me. Like it sounds like how kind of a child would think those things. So that's something like right off the bat that I feel like lent this a lot of, I don't know, it felt a little bit more genuine, and she really felt like a little girl, you know. A lot of young children with talents like this in books are written as like so precocious and so like ahead of their years and everything. And I really appreciate that even though she was described as like bright, she's still a child. She's not so precocious that she's like immune to being a child, if that makes sense, you know. So I appreciate that. I appreciate when children characters are written like they're actual children, because even if you're very precocious, you're very smart as a child, like you're still a child. There's still a lot of emotional things that like are just not where they are for adults. So I really appreciate that. I thought that that was so well done. The story in general had a really, really intense, I mean, I was on the edge of my seat for so much of it. You could argue that the timing like slowed so much after they were taken captive, and it did, but in a way, because it was so tense up until that point, it was kind of like a welcome relief to like have a moment to like not be on the edge of your seat for like a few chapters, a few sections, you know. It was kind of nice to just like have a little more build up and then have another just like really, really heart-pounding stretch like towards the end there. I love that the Manderses came back into the story, because when they were initially introduced, I remember thinking like, I hope we figure out what happens to them, and it kind of seemed like we weren't exactly gonna see them again or anything. I wasn't sure, because I think usually that's the case, but sometimes not. So I was really happy that that's what happened in the end. Really, really well written. Just an incredibly heart-pounding, suspenseful book, and also just the like father-daughter relationship was so incredibly sweet, and I really liked seeing that. Something that I also just kind of made a note of. Now, by the way, I'm just like giving my thoughts without any notes because I'm living life on the edge today, I guess. But something that I just like took a mental note of was when it was kind of going over Andy's, I forget what he was on. He was on like Thorazine or something like that. Some sort of a pill that I think kind of like mellowed him out, that they gave him after they had him captive. They had both of them on various like drug cocktails or whatever, but whatever he ended up on for the most part, it was really interesting that he like talking about like how it numbed him and all of these things, and like the experience of like basically then not having the pills and how that made him feel. And I know that Stephen King himself has, as I've talked about before, I think, and as he's talked about very openly, has struggled with like addiction, I think with drinking and drugs, pills maybe, in the past. So it was just it felt really accurate, and it was pretty visceral in the way that he almost was going back and forth, where it's like obviously he cares about what happened to his daughter, but he was like in this moment, a lot of like it was just the withdrawal, you know, from whatever they were giving him. So that was really interesting. I also like the twist of how, not twist really, but like the little part where Andy pushed himself into like not needing the pills anymore. Like he could push himself through that like dependency or addiction, which was kind of cool. Yeah, there were like a lot of little parts like that that I thought were really interesting. I know this kind of ties into like the Institute as well, which I actually read before this. I loved the Institute, and this book was also just really, really good. I feel like there are definitely critiques I could make with it. Like I said, the part where it kind of slowed after they were captive, in some ways it was like a welcome rest basically, so that you weren't so overwhelmed with suspense and go the entire book. But it did drag like a little bit too long in my opinion. There were a few too many like extraneous conversations I think that were probably included, but overall, I loved the story so much that that I could kind of like get over that. And like I said, I think that his writing of like whenever it was Charlie's thoughts, his writing of a child character were really, really great. And he really does excel at making the Northeast feel like magical and special. So I loved the parts when they were at Andy's grandfather's cabin. I really am a big like description person, like scenery person. So when I read about like scenic areas, and that to me like came into my head really clearly and was so beautiful, and it felt like they got like just a moment to breathe, even though like surely Andy knew in his head deep down somewhere that they were still being watched. They had a moment to breathe. Just that being depicted was kind of nice. A really, really wild ride, and I'm pretty excited. I know a lot of people have said the movie's not very good, but I still am planning to watch it because something that I love to do after reading Stephen King books is if there is a film adaptation, I love watching it. I mean, I like doing this with a lot of books, but especially Stephen King books. I love seeing like how that plays out on the screen. So this is one that I'm kind of excited to watch, even though I know it might not be that good. That's okay. I don't have a lot to say other than I just was freaking in love with this book. Like, it was so good. I love when you are reading a book where like every time you have a second of free time, like every 5 minutes that you have, you want to like pick it up for just a few pages. And this was definitely one of those books. And yeah, just really excited to read another Stephen King book soon because it's kind of starting to be like autumn almost, but like it's kind of starting to be that time of year where I feel like I want to up my spooky books a little bit. And so I'm definitely really excited. That's probably going to be it for this review. Let me know below if you've read this and if you've seen the movie, like what your thoughts are, because I definitely just loved this book. I'm sure the movie's not that good comparatively, but yeah, just an amazing book, and I would love to know what your thoughts are. Please like, please subscribe, all that good stuff, and I will see you later.